Hi, welcome to Speech Talk Live, episode number 62, and also part of the Great Speaker series that I recently started. My name is Jay Oza. I'm the host of the show. I also teach, mentor, and coach people on public speaking so that they can give winning high stakes speeches. Today, on this episode, I have Tamsen Webster as a guest. And it's been a privilege talking to Tamsen. Tamsen is a part idea whisperer. She makes sure that there is this common, she calls red thread, that runs throughout the entire presentation. So that idea has to run throughout the entire presentation from start to finish. And when you see some of her videos that I will provide links to, you can see that. Second, she's a message strategist. Message is very important. At the end of your speech, you've got to know what your message is. And a lot of times people just don't know you don't know what the message is. So she helps people develop a message. It strategizes it. Is that what's going to get people from A to Z, whatever it is? Okay. Third thing is she is a presentation coach. So she coaches people on how to do that when you're on stage. But I think she's more than that. She's a thinker. When you watch some of her videos where she has given presentation, you can see she's a deep thinker. She's an outstanding speaker. Every time I watch her, I learn something new. And also, she's an executive producer of TEDx Cambridge, which is the oldest and the largest locally organized TED Talk events in the world. So she brings a lot of different perspectives to public speaking. So I wanted to talk to her so that we can all learn from her, because she knows what she's doing when it comes to speaking, messaging, and performing. So when you watch this, we covered 3 or 4 things. The first thing I focus on is the fear. Because at one time, when you see her, she looks confident. She exudes confidence. She's like in complete command of her content and message and performance, and she controls the audience too. She has a real good control over the audience. But that's not how she was from the beginning. She had a lot of fear, and we focus on how she overcame that fear and how does she manage it today. Then we move on to TED speeches, because I told her, look, when I see TED speeches, I'm like a TED addict. I admitted that. I said, those speeches, they look perfect. There's nothing I see wrong with them. But it also causes fear that, hey, I'm just never going to pull that off. And she did admit that those speeches are edited sometimes, but many of them are not edited. They are that good because there's a lot of time that people spend, sometimes as much as 300 hours. And I told her, look, that's not really practical in a business setting when you got work to do and you also have to give a speech. So then we focus on, is it possible to give a decent speech? And she said, yes, it is possible. It won't be TED-like speech, but it will be good enough for business setting, considering the time constraints that we all face. Next, then we talk about the 5 elements that you need in a speech, such as the audience goal, the problem that they're facing, what's the idea, the change that needs to happen, and the 5th one is the action that people have to take. And then what I had asked her to do was take one of her speech that she had done a while back, and I said, are those 5 elements, can you explain to us how those 5 elements show up in that speech? And she kind of walks us through that speech, and that speech I will provide a link to. It's called Easy is the New Hard. It's a speech she had given in 2015 for HubSpot's annual conference called Inbound, and it's Inbound 2015. And the interesting thing is this speech is only about 14 minutes, so obviously if you're going to say easy is new hard, your speech can't be too long. So she covers a lot in less than 15 minutes, and that's what I like about that speech. And I told her, I said, that is an excellent speech that we can all learn from. So I hope you enjoy the show, And just one thing is the quality is not as good as I would have liked to, but there's not much you can do about that. Sometimes technology gets in the way. It's not that annoying, but at some point it is kind of breaking up. So I hope you can bear with that. Uh, and hey, enjoy the show and let me know what you think. I think I have a paper and pen ready because there's a lot to learn here. And I think after watching this, you're going to learn new things about public speaking and that you can directly use when you're giving your speech. Okay, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Hello, welcome to the show. My name is Jay Oza, and today I'm honored to have Tamsen Webster on the show. Just a brief little intro of Tamsen. I'll let her go into it more detail. She's a part idea whisperer, part message strategist, a very important thing, a part presentation coach, and she has coached some of the top companies such as Verizon, J&J, Disney, just to name a few. And one thing that she does is quite interesting is she's the executive producer of TEDx Cambridge. And for those who may not be familiar, TEDx Cambridge is one of the oldest and the largest locally organized TED Talk events in the world. So Tamsen has a lot of experience and brings unique perspective on public speaking. So I wanted to have her on the show so that we can learn from her experience, her insights, and what is out there in the industry that's working. So Tamsen, thank you for joining the show.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks a lot. I know you're very busy, so I appreciate you taking time out and joining us today. Please add more to the background if there's anything else that you think that I might have left out that is important. And kind of talk
I'm sure
about,
it'll come up.
Yeah, sure. And kind of talk about, just so that the audience get an idea, because I consider you a great speaker, because I've seen many of your speeches. Luckily, one day I'll get to see you live. And I just love a lot of things that you do when you're giving a speech. It's just so natural the way you do it. And
thank you.
I've watched many of your speeches like multiple times, and every time I watch it, I pick up something new. And also doing a lot of research on you, you just bring so much unique insight into public speaking. So kind of talk about your public speaking. How did you get to be where you are today? And then we'll take it from there.
Oh, it's a long, strange journey to where I am today. I like a lot of public speakers, there was some background where when I was much, much younger, I enjoyed the idea of being on stage. I think we'll probably come back to that later. I didn't actually enjoy the experience of it. I love the idea of being on stage. But I didn't pursue that in any way when I was going to school. Instead, I wanted to do something I knew would get me employed. So I studied business, I studied marketing. And as it turned out that over time, the various organizations where I worked, we were doing interesting things that we thought could help other people in similar organizations. So when I worked at museums, we were doing interesting things with exhibition planning. So we wanted to help other museums figure that out. And when I was doing fundraising at Harvard Medical School, we wanted to help other fundraisers figure out how do you solve some of these sticky problems of communication. And so I started to give talks mostly to help other organizations that were like the organizations I was in. And at the same time, in addition to my full-time job, I was a Weight Watchers leader. So on one level, I was getting this, how does this work on a large scale? Not only how do I get change to happen in the marketplace, but how do I get people to a big room full of people to think differently about something. But then every week, week in, week out for 13 years, I was getting a small group of people to change their behavior and how they think about things. And it just became very fascinating to me about how those two things intersected. And I wanted to start figuring that out. And so when I had the opportunity about 3 years ago to become the executive producer of TEDx Cambridge, I leapt at the chance because this was the intersection of everything that I loved. It was how do you find an interesting idea? How do you get it out there? How can a talk like that help somebody achieve their goal, whether they're the speaker or the audience member? And more importantly, what is it that they did that made it work. So it was this natural evolution of starting with, at first, speaking on behalf of the organizations, and then more and more, and particularly once I went out on my own and became an entrepreneur last year, it's now part of, my business model is to speak, so that I speak about speaking, which my kids find hysterical.
So you're a student and a teacher of public speaking.
I am constantly. I'm always want to learn more.
Right. One of the things I noticed in one of your podcasts that you mentioned, and you talk about it quite frankly, about the fear you had when you started out. Can you kind of speak about how you overcame that fear? Because a lot of people, on the Coursera website, that seems to be one of the most active thread. And a lot of people are taking this course that I mentor because they want to overcome their fear. And they're always asking, how do I overcome my fear? And a lot of the students are from abroad, where public speaking is not as emphasized as it is here in the United States. I thought that if you can kind of talk about how you overcame fear and how do you manage it today? Because I believe that you always should have some fear when you get in front of a stage. Otherwise, you probably don't care. So I wanted to kind of get your thought on that.
It's if I actually knew the exact answer, I'd be a bajillionaire, because I am one of the very rare people who, I had a panic disorder, diagnosed, medicated, treated with therapy, panic disorder for 17 years, crippling panic attacks. The first big one was when I was 16, prepping to go on stage for a musical while I was in high school, emergency room. So it was not insignificant. I mean, there were points in my life where I had severe agoraphobia. I couldn't drive. It was really uncomfortable for me to leave the house. And so this, I kind of wonder sometimes, I'm like, how exactly did I end up doing this work when that's where I came from? There's not a single easy answer, but let me give you a few of them that I think swirled together to help. One was repeated inoculation. And, they say that that's an important piece for any kind of fear or phobia, is to keep putting yourself into that situation over and over and over again. And that is important. But the second thing that's really important about that, so that was happening because I had to speak, I had to leave my house, I had to do all these things. And I didn't want to live my life trapped in fear. So one of my favorite movies is a movie by Baz Luhrmann called Strictly Ballroom. It's ridiculous and wonderful, but there's a wonderful line that I still remember to this day, that the first time I heard it, I was like, whoa, that's everything I want to know. And it was this line. It was, "A life lived in fear is a life half lived." And the minute I heard that, I was like, I don't want half a life. This is not okay with me. It's not okay for me even just to manage this. Like I want to figure out how to get past it. And when someone, a therapist, frankly, finally said, "Why do you think you have to always live with it?" And I remember saying to him, "You mean it's possible that I don't?" And he's like, "Do you think it's possible that you don't?" And I was like, well, I'm going to find out. And so the repeated exposure is important for that reason. But the second thing that's really critical on top of that is noticing that is never as bad as you think it's going to be. And in fact, it's better. In other words, if you look for what's bad, it's always going to be bad. But if you look for the fact that, oh, this is working. Oh, they're getting what they need from this message, then it becomes a lot easier. I found it to become much, much easier to go, it's what the reason I'm here is more important than any physical discomfort I might feel. That's first and foremost. So when I was a Weight Watcher leader, I used to say to myself, Tamsen, check your dignity at the door, which was my way of reminding myself that there wasn't any benefit for me putting up a front. There was no benefit there. In fact, it got in the way of what I was trying to say to people. And so that really was a huge part of it, was to say that was to repeated exposure, notice that what was important notice and focus on what was important. Another favorite phrase of mine is whatever you give attention to grows stronger. So if you focus on the fear, that's going to be more strong. If you focus on the connection with the audience, that's going to be stronger. And you know what? They can't coexist. They cannot coexist. And so it really was this combination of things that over time, I realized that what was creating the most fear in my head was a series of what if questions. What if I forget? What if I have a panic attack on stage? What if I faint? What if they can tell that I'm shaking? What if? And, it sounds so simple, but one day I just said to myself, answer the question. Well, what if that happens? Then what? Well, then I'd do this. Oh, okay. And then that took care of a huge part of it. And then I'd say the second big part of it was not only answering that what if, but allowing myself to be okay with the fact that it was normal and natural to feel the physical effects of fear. Because it's not normal for people to stand on stage with a whole bunch of people looking at you. Like, we're pack animals. We're all meant to be traveling in a group and looking the same way. So if one of you is turned around facing the other way, like, that's usually not a good situation. So it's normal to feel that. And once I got to a point where I could regularly say to myself, it's natural that you're having this reaction in this space, so just feel it. And oh, by the way, focus on the thing that you want here more. And those two things together kind of just really over time just made it go away. So that I haven't had panic attack. I haven't had a panic attack in 8 years. Even on stage, do I still get nervous? Absolutely. When I get on stage, I cannot feel my hands when I start, but everything just starts to settle in place, and then I'm there.
Right, because the two of the things that when I started, there was no iPhone or anything like that you could just record. So one thing was joining Toastmasters that gives you an opportunity to speak in front of a friendly audience. So you get over that fear of being judged. And that certainly helped me by going through that program. But I think today, the other thing, like I say, one of the things I always tell people, or students who are watching, or anybody, is that, we have video cameras. Just record yourself, and you're going to be your best judge, how you like yourself. And you can do that today. Of course, and sometimes what I found is that recording in front of a camera is actually more difficult than giving a speech in front of a live audience, because you just don't get any kind of feedback. And I've noticed that a lot of times I appear much stiffer when I'm recording videos, but then when I see audience, then I always feel like they're rooting for me, and it just makes me much more relaxed. I don't know if you noticed that, but that's what I've noticed the more I'm speaking.
Yeah, it's important, I think, particularly as a method of getting comfort and overcoming fear, to the audiences actually help you, and we're most afraid of them, but they help you. What's interesting is the longer you become a speaker, you realize that you can't actually rely on them as much as you'd like to. So it becomes one of those things where the energy and the passion is something that really needs to be built into the talk from the beginning, so that whether or not you have a small audience or a large audience, you are able to deliver that with the same level of energy, whether or not you're getting it back from the audience. So there's a friend and fellow speaker named Scott McCain, and he quotes his coach as telling him this thing. I just love this. And he said, you write from passion and you deliver from skill. And I love that, because it's really, it actually becomes a safer place as a speaker to say, I don't have to drum up this passion every time. If I've put it into what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, like if it's built into the talk, if it's built into the message, if it's built in that I'm going to be excited and passionate and I'm just really revved up about this thing that I'm saying, then it takes so much of that pressure off of what do you actually have to do on stage. And I am all about, given my history, taking the pressure off of what you have to do in the moment, because I want to make sure that as much energy as I can is focused on the audience and maintaining my connection with them, because that's the only way I can get the message that I have to transfer to them with as little loss of meaning as possible. And that's always my goal, like frictionless transfer.
Right. To kind of segue to another thing that you do, you being an executive producer of TEDx Cambridge. And one of the things I want to ask you about TEDx is, do you think TED kind of adds to that fear? Because a lot of the speakers that you see on TED stage, I mean, they look perfect. Many of them, they just give a perfect speech, and they never seem nervous, and they get through their own speech. And then when you try it, like a lot of the people who are taking courses, they're like, I just don't think I can pull that off the way they do. They look so good doing it that when I do it, it's just not going to come out that way. What do you have to say to that? That as TED is, I love TED. I'm a big TED addict. But TED has also raised the bar to the point where there are a lot of people out there feel like they're just, and when they find out the number of hours that you spend coaching many of the TED speakers who speak on a TEDx Cambridge stage or the national TED stage, they just don't think they have that kind of time that they could even do a comparable job like you see many of the TED speakers. What do you have to say to that?
So two things. First thing is here's the big secret. They're not as perfect as they look. So pulling the curtain back on TED a little bit, here's some things that you don't know about the videos that end up on TED. They are highly edited. I have had the pleasure of attending a TED Summit event in Canada, in Banff, Canada, for last summer. So I got to see a lot of the talks that you're seeing coming out right now live on stage then. So Alexander Betz's talk and Jennifer Bray's talk and all sorts of great talks I got to see live on stage. Here's what I can tell you. They stop, they mess up, they forget where they are. All of that gets fixed in post. In other words, they record everything and then they go back and then TED edits out a lot of those breaks in what happens. In fact, I discovered just this past fall from a speaker who had been on the TED Women's stage that TED actually records the dress rehearsal as a failsafe. In case someone completely blows it during the actual performance, they will splice in pieces of the dress rehearsal, which is bananas to me. So that's the first thing, is the bar is not as high as people have come to think that it is. However, that said, the bar is still really, really high because most people don't know that it's fixed in post. So the expectation is that speakers should be as natural, as engaging, as thoughtful, as storytelling, as focused on a big idea, as simple and clear as what you see online. So that leads me to my second point. You say, well, most people don't, they find out the amount of time that would go into it. Pay attention to that, because to truly be great, the speakers that you look at and say, oh, they look so comfortable, they look so natural, they have worked their butts off to get to that point. Like I say, I can't feel my hands when I go on stage. So if you can't tell that looking at me, that's because I've put that much practice in. But everybody that you see puts that much work in. So if you want to be a speaker at that level, one of the first things to understand is nobody wings it. Nobody wings it. Everybody puts that level of work in. So if that's the kind of speaker you want to be, then buckle down and get ready to do that work, because that is in fact what it requires.
Right. But in a business setting, you really don't have that kind of time. Like sometimes I've heard that people, TED speakers like Elizabeth Gilbert or someone like that, spend close to 300 hours. I mean, their numbers are just, and when you're working in a company, at most, you may get 2 weeks to prepare for a speech, if that.
Yeah.
So if somebody came to you and said, Tamsen, help, I got to give a big speech in about, let's say, 2 weeks. What can you tell them that would help them give a good speech? What are things that you would coach them in the 2 week time that they have? And I don't even know how much time they can actually put in. Can they actually craft and deliver a good speech in that much amount of time in a corporate setting?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, I would say yes. Is it going to be a TED quality, put it up on TED stage and have it ready? No, but not everything is that high stakes. I mean, TED Talks and TEDx Talks are enormously high stakes because they get recorded and thousands, if not millions of people see them. I mean, this is a huge, but there are lessons that we can take from that and say, how could I, if I'm in business and I want to be a better presenter and I at least want my message to be as memorable and as effective as a TED Talk, can I do that? My answer is an unequivocal yes, absolutely you can. Because here's the thing that most people miss is that the key to a truly effective, a truly memorable message doesn't lie in the delivery of it. I mean, the delivery is important. Don't get me wrong. I was talking with somebody yesterday who says, well, you're going to pick up an apple, you know, you're going to pick an apple up in the grocery store based on how it looks, right? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, yeah, but if you taste it and it's not any good, then you're not going to pick up that apple again and you're not going to recommend it to other people. The thing is, you know, if nothing else, that, you know, there's a lot to be learned from heirloom fruit and vegetables, right? That sometimes the ugliest looking things can have the best insides. And that is, by and large, a lesson that can be applied to presentations in a business setting. If the message is strong, if the idea is clear, if it's simple, if you have thought through what's the most effective way to transfer not the surface details of something, but the meaning of what you're talking about, that is absolutely something you can do within the 2-week time frame that most of us have. And the good news is it means, honestly, that you end up doing less of the stuff that seems to take the most time, like filling slides with bullets and all this other stuff, and more time focusing on what is it that I'm trying to say and what absolutely is the best way for me to get this point across. And when you do that, a lot of times that's a process of removal, not of addition. And that's a lot easier to do in 2 weeks. You know, the 300 hours for a TED Talk, all of that's about, I need to find the absolute core of the idea that I want to be known for. I need to make sure it's like nobody else. I need to make sure that only I could talk about it this way, that I'm unassailable in that. And I need to make sure that it's delivered and scripted and written and all of that in such a way. I mean, that's where all those hours come in. But the time it takes to get to the core of what is it you're trying to get across, the heart of that does not take extraordinary amount of time. It just takes thoughtfulness. And that's what I would encourage anybody in a business situation to do, is exchange busy work of slide making for thoughtfulness around meaning. What am I trying to say? Why am I trying to say it? What's the movement I'm trying to create for somebody that I'm talking to? Like, where are they now and where do I want to get them to? What's the meaning that's going to get them there? And that kind of thoughtfulness will pay off in spades, regardless of whether or not your delivery is perfect.
Right. So in the 2 weeks, you can use the 5 elements that you always talk about in developing your speech. Can you briefly go through those 5 elements? And then I would like to use one of the speech that you gave that's on YouTube. That was that Inbound 2015, which I love, because it's a short speech, but you cover so much in that short speech. Easy is the new hard, which I'd recommend to everybody view it, because that is a great speech, by the way. So just if you can talk about the 5 elements so that people who are watching it will get an idea how you go about constructing a speech, and then how you weave it into the story structure, the 3-act story structure that you use.
Sure. Well, the core of the meeting I was just talking about, when, you know, whether it's a TED Talk or a business presentation, is the key idea. It's the key message, is the big idea. And the Scandinavians use a phrase for that called the red thread. You know, they'll use it to say, well, what's the red thread? What's the meaning of this? What does it mean? What's the thing that ties all this together? And so I love to use that to describe and name the meaning. The challenge, of course, is, well, how do you figure that out? And a lot of times, we don't bother to ask that question in the first place. What is the big message I'm trying to get across? What is the red thread of this presentation, regardless of the scope or scale? And the second thing is, even if we have asked that question, we don't really know how to get there. So this is a puzzle I wanted to solve. This is where I started to look at, well, what worked? What were the consistent things that worked across 20 years in branding and marketing, and all the work I've done with my own talks, and with what worked for the talks that I was helping to coach to the TEDx Cambridge stage. And as I was looking at other TED Talks, like what was consistent? And what I found was that there were 5 elements that are always there, and they're always there in a certain and specific order. And while not every talk or presentation has a red thread, all the great ones do. And so here are the 5 elements. The first element is a goal. Now that the instinct will be, I have a goal as a speaker. This is my goal. No. The goal is the audience's goal walking in. What is the thing that they want that this talk or this presentation will eventually help them with? And it can be something as simple as, I want to know how, this team is doing financially this month, like an update meeting, or it can be something quite grand and larger scale, like how do we differentiate ourselves in the marketplace? But it's something they would readily say yes to. And the reason why we start with a goal is because you always want the talk to start where the audience is right now. Remember, I said the talk is about creating movement. So the talk has to be a place where they would readily say, yep, this is what I want. Now, to start making this so interesting, what you, of course, want to do is say, well, there's a reason why you're not figuring that out right now, whether you're not getting to your goal, and that is an underlying problem. So the problem is the second piece of the red thread. And I much prefer it when, even in a business presentation, when that problem is an unknown problem. It's a perspective on what's really going on that is counter to what people are doing right now. So, when you're thinking through that, for instance, you're trying to differentiate yourself in the marketplace, but the problem is you're focusing on what everybody else is doing, and really what's happening is you actually haven't paid enough attention to the strength that's sitting within your own brand, for instance, would be a problem. Now, the instinct will jump to the conclusion, but this is a place where I am adamant that there is something that happens after the problem, before the solution, that has to be in every great talk. And it is what I call the idea. And I call it the idea because it is, in fact, an idea. It's not a behavior change. It's not a shift. It's a realization that of a concept, a new piece of information that explains both why the problem is such a problem and why the change is a necessary one. And here's why it's critical. Any presentation, whether it's a business update meeting or a TED Talk, is making the case for something. You are arguing for a point of view. And the idea is the heart of that point of view. And when you're asking people to make a change, when you're asking them to move from point A to point B, you have to give them a sufficient reason to. And the idea is the thing that they have to say yes to before they're receptive to the change you're asking them to make. In other words, you have to be able to make the case that if I want you to focus on your own brand rather than everybody else's, I have to sufficiently make the case that what you have right now is stronger than anything that you can pick up from anybody outside. For instance, once you have that idea, the third piece of the red thread, then you can introduce a change. And that's frankly a thing I see happen so often with talks, is they jump straight into, here's the thing we want you to do, and then now let me back up and explain why it's the right thing. But people aren't ready to say yes to it. You have to have gone through these other things first. So the change is this high level shift in direction. So that, maybe this talk that I'm talking about from a differentiated standpoint, this high level change is go back and identify the strongest pieces of your brand and build your marketing around that, right? So make your marketing brand oriented, not channel oriented, might be a way that I'm talking about it. And then the fifth piece of the red thread, which if you're paying close attention to TED Talks, doesn't always show up because there's usually not enough time, but is the fifth piece, are the actions, or the specific things that people can take to create that change. So we've got goal, problem, idea, change, action, and those are the 5 pieces. So if you're asking, it was kind of fun to go back and look at Easy is the New Hard, because I developed that talk before I really figured those 5 pieces out. So I went back and I was like, oh my God, I hope they're still there. I hope those pieces are in there. And I was delighted to find out that they were. Really early on, I start with a story about how, as a little girl, I was obsessed with figuring out how to spend less time loading the dishwasher, mostly because I figured I was lazy. But the goal that I established for the audience is kind of, we all want things to be that easy, don't we? We want to spend less time on the things that are hard for us or not enjoyable. So that was the goal statement. It's like, we all want that. We all want things to be easier than they are. And the problem that I introduced was that we've got this mistaken belief that things have to be hard in order for us to be successful, in order for us to make progress. And the fundamental idea that whole talk hinged on was that when we work with how we think, we make things easy. In other words, hard works against our willingness and ability to do something. So if we work with how we think, it will become easy. And therefore, if how we think about it is easy, how we do it will be easy. And so my answer to that was the high level change I wanted people to make. Create frameworks, create ways to think about the ways you think in order to make the hard things easier. And then the action, which there were in that talk as well, was I gave two big actions. One was you can build your own framework based on what works and what doesn't, scientific method, or you can borrow frameworks. You can look at what's working for other people and say, that same pattern would show up here. So I was delighted to see that worked. But those are the 5 pieces. And those are how the 5 pieces show up in that particular talk.
Yeah, I just had it written down, and I think I got all of them except the last one, the action I just put down, that she's basically talking about using the framework. I didn't get that borrow and build parts. That was a really well constructed speech there. And I just like the way you start out with a story and then how you got the audience to participate. And it's a different kind of speech than what you would see at a TED, but that's the kind of speech that I like to give.
Thank you. I mean, what's interesting about TED is that TED, to the organizers of TEDx events, TED is actively looking for people to start innovating off of the form. You always know that something needs to be innovated on when it's open to parody, and there have been at least 2 fairly famous parody talks or TED Talks. So like there was a TED Talk that was about giving TED Talks, and it's hysterical. But then there's another one that's another very similar idea. And so whenever you get to a point where people are like, oh, well, I'm going to start with a personal story. And then, and then you can kind of mimic both the delivery and the construction of it, then it's a good time to innovate. So you know what? If anybody out there has a TED or a TEDx talk on their bucket list and they're like, but I like to do more experiential things, I'm like, go for it, because TED wants that. So, and honestly, even your business update meeting wants that too. Like they want that more engagement. They want to be a part of what you are talking about, particularly once they start to get excited about it.
Right. 2 closing questions, and then we'll wrap it up here. So, you have a lot of experience in speaking. Are there any speakers or any speeches that you would recommend that people take a look at? They can learn a lot from how they do it. I know that there are some speeches that you love. Are there any speakers that today that you think they give really excellent speeches? They cover all these 5 elements real well.
I'm pretty agnostic about that. I mean, there are people who. I'll be totally honest. I have recency bias with that. So I'm most in love with the most recent speaker I saw, where I just was like, why was that so good? And then I go back and I'm like, oh, that was why they were so good. That was great. So right now, the one that I'm marveling at is one of the top TED Talks is Jill Bolte Taylor and her My Stroke of Insight talk on TED. And I kind of love her because she represents a couple things that I really like to work on. One is people who are like, well, I don't have a natural stage presence. I mean, neither does she. I mean, she's not what you would consider a totally polished presenter. Does she know her stuff cold? Yes. But does she fit into this, model of a polished presenter. No. The second thing that I love is that she takes a very complicated subject and uses an incredible number of very scientific terms, but you get the meaning of it. So you don't get confused by the words because she's constructed that talk so beautifully well. She's given, I like to say, code hooks of meaning on which to hang all this detail that she's putting on it. And the third thing I really love about it is it's a great example of how someone builds credibility in order to land an idea that without that credibility, people wouldn't listen to. And because ultimately that talk is about connecting your energy to the rest of the universe. And if she had walked out and be like, I'm going to talk to you today about how to connect your energy to the rest of the universe, she'd be like, you are crazy and I am not listening to you. But she does a beautiful job of opening that talk by saying, why is it that I, as a scientist, can connect my dreams to reality, whereas my brother, who has a brain disorder, cannot? And so she starts with what sounds like a scientific question, but if you think about it, she was actually telling you right at the beginning that her whole talk was about connecting dreams to reality. And she just does it in this beautiful way. So she's my current favorite.
Right. That's the one where she had a stroke, I believe. Is that?
Yeah, stroke. Yeah, she was a neuroanatomist. She's talking about the whole realization of how the brain actually functions by what happened to her as she was able to essentially study it while she was having a stroke. So while she was having a stroke, she started to realize what the true binary functioning of the brain hemispheres are, and was able to realize that the division of them is a false construct mentally, and that you can cross over willingly from one to the other and understand that reality and dreams are connected all the time. You just have to choose which side of your brain that you are focused on at the moment.
Right. That's actually one of the most popular TED Talks of all time.
Yeah, if you just do a search for top TED Talks, you'll find it.
Before I ask my final question, Tamsen, let me thank you for your generosity of coming on the show and helping people out and all the stuff that you do, appearing and giving all kinds of advice and tips and techniques on public speaking. I learn a lot every time I listen to your podcast and watch you give a speech. And people will start seeing some of the things I'm picking up from
thank you.
Things that you're doing. The last question is, what's the last thing you tell yourself or a speaker who goes on the stage? Is there like a one thing that just say, that you have that gets you like?
I'm not sure I can say it. This is a family thing.
You can clean it up.
It's a much more guttural version of check your dignity at the door. So to keep it family friendly, honestly, the last thing I say to myself and that I say to the speakers I coach is F it right before, mostly because it's just like, it's basically to say to myself, whatever is going to happen is going to happen. Put yourself in the moment and let it be what it's going to be, knowing you've already done the work to make it as good as it can be.
Okay, great. I'll remember that. Okay, Tamsen, thank you very much. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we close the show?
No, it was delightful to be a part. And if anybody wants to find me online, I'm easy. I'm the only Tamsen Webster that's out there. So tamsenwebster.com, and I'm on Twitter at Tamadeer.
Right. I'll put all that stuff there. I'll also have a little intro video that'll go more into what you do, and I will send it to you to take a look at. Okay, Tamsen, thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Appreciate it, Jay.